Billoo, who's the Executive Director of CARE, San Francisco, and I will let him take it away, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I sometimes have a difficult time projecting my voice, so if you can't hear me in the back, let me know. Actually, you wouldn't know if you couldn't hear me, so just go to sleep and we'll find out that way. So I was asked to give you a short talk, and I really hope this would be a conversation with some questions, because it's a really important subject. And what we're talking about today is the power of the internet. This isn't a talk I've done before, so be generous, but also understand that the reason I was asked to give this talk, I think, is because people seem to like my Facebook page. I have no idea why, but that's what happens. The blurb that was given, in case you don't know, specifically focused on how the internet is now a new area of democracy, and how it gives the power to the people to really control the story and the storytelling. And the story I want to open with is actually one of a case that our office worked on a while ago. And who here has heard of Yasser Afifi and the GPS story? Okay, so some of you have heard of it. The story, in short, is really about a young college student who took his car to a mechanic one day. And while the car was hoisted at the mechanic shop, he looked under the car and discovered a device that he didn't recognize. They disabled the device, they took it off the car, and they went home, right? And they posted the story on the internet. They said, we found this thing on the car, we don't know what it is it? Help us out, right? And within a day, the story went viral. And I'll tell you that the first time I heard of the story was not actually from my client, it was from Gizmodo, Australia. So this is a Bay Area student whose story made it viral within a day to Australia, right? And so when I first saw the story, I thought, who's this kid? What's going on, right? And this is really impressive that his story has made it worldwide. And 2 days later, we realized it was a young Muslim man in the Bay Area. But that sort of shows you how much you can tell without having access to MSNBC or Fox News or the Huffington Post or the New York Times, right? That's what you can do. And that's what these young men did. And through that, the story, like I said, got our attention, and then it got national attention. And it was an interesting situation to have the story really spread out that far. And I think what went right in looking at that story was, one, it was local, it was personal, but also the headline never read Muslim student tracked by the FBI. The headline read college student tracked by the FBI. And what does that tell you? Why did that resonate so widely with people, right? People thought, I'm a college student. And so the people that were spreading the story were actually not as often Muslims as it was non-Muslims, or people who had a civil rights focus and who cared about these types of stories. Several weeks into the case, I'm on a plane on the way to Long Beach, and my friend's husband is sitting 2 seats down from me, and we're catching up, and there's another young man in the middle of us, not a Muslim, not a civil rights advocate, probably someone that works in the tech industry, considering we were flying in from San Jose. And my Muslim friend, 2 seats down from me, has no idea what I'm talking about and has never heard the story. The guy in the middle is laughing as I'm telling it because he's familiar with the story, right? And so that sort of shows you what you guys have the ability to do. So who here has heard the term the marketplace of ideas? Okay, who wants to define it? I'll take on you if you don't volunteer. Any thoughts on the marketplace of ideas? Lady in the blue?
Sure. You don't really put any restrictions on what ideas go out there, and so you just have this huge thing of just all these ideas that people have, and so
right.
It's the marketplace.
Exactly. And how does the marketplace work, right? You compare all the products and you decide what's the best, right? And the consumer makes that decision. And so the marketplace of ideas sort of gives, is an approach to censorship that says we shouldn't censor material, we shouldn't censor things we don't like, we should counter them with good ideas. So when we saw a lot of Muslims doing this, first when we saw the Danish cartoon, right? The first reaction was people got upset, people protested, people wanted the cartoons banished. But the second time that wave came around, it wasn't that way. The second time the community had learned, and they said, we're going to explore the life of the Prophet, we're going to hand out Quran, we're going to teach people about Islam. And so the idea was that you put the good and the bad out there and you would let the consumer choose. And really that's what the internet does, is it gives you the power to do that. It gives you the power to participate in that marketplace. The reason I got started in the internet was actually about 4 or 5 years ago. I'd already moved to San Francisco, and I was no longer here, but Daniel Pike spoke at a protest, or spoke at an event at UC Irvine. And I forwarded one email to a listserv about that protest, simply announcing the protest. I wasn't there, I wasn't an organizer, I had nothing to do with it. And frankly, I didn't even read the news after the protest, right? And 2 days later, someone sends me an email saying that a website called the Militant Islam Monitor had found out that I had forwarded that email, had tied me to the protest, called me an organizer, and posted a video of me at the protest. Except I wasn't there, right? And so the concern was, here I am, a young student in law school, not knowing what to do or how to control the dialogue. But I do know that all of my future employers will Google my name, right? And know that all of your future employers will Google your name. And so it was really important for us to take control of the narrative. And this was right around the time a lot of young Muslims had started blogging. And I don't mean the professional bloggers, I mean the college students, where we started seeing that this was what was working for the opposition, and so we needed to get in there and control the dialogue, so that when they Googled UC Irvine, or when they Googled Zahra Billoo, or when they Googled Hafsa Saida, they would get the story that we wanted to tell. And so it really became about telling our narrative, about controlling our identity. So, question for all of you guys, where do you get your news from?
Twitter.
The New York Times, Twitter, right? Who else gets it from Twitter? Right. Who followed the Tunisia protests and revolution over Twitter? Right? Where else do you get your news from? Facebook. Okay, what do you follow on Facebook?
Updates on things that's happening.
Okay. Who else? Any other websites?
BBC. Al Jazeera.
Al Jazeera, Huffington Post. Any others?
Reddit.
Reddit's a really popular one, right? And Reddit is the one where we got the GPS story from. Now the interesting thing about Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, and quite often now even the Huffington Post, is that you all have access to them, right? You can create a Twitter account and tell a story. And so for example, when the flotilla situation was happening last summer, right? Most people were not getting their news from mainstream news sources, they were getting it from Twitter. And how was that happening? People on the flotilla were telling the story and people were retweeting it across the world, right? And so for example, I'll tell you that my husband and I killed our BlackBerry batteries just retweeting these stories, right? And we were sitting there obsessively reading. But the idea is that you control the story. The same happens with Reddit, right? So with Reddit, these young men posted a picture of the device and immediately figured out what it was, but also the story went viral because they told their story, right? And so how do you do that? What do you do? What tools are at your disposal? I want to start with the don'ts. I think it's really important to focus on the don'ts. As someone who does this frequently and gets in trouble quite often, I have to remind myself of the don'ts. Does anyone want to volunteer any don'ts for social media? What can't you do? What shouldn't you be doing? Yes?
Post personal information.
Correct, don't post personal information. Don't post your house address, guys. That's really basic, right? Know that someone might come and knock you if you do. Post your cell phone number at your disposal, but also know that like when you post your cell phone number in an email on a listserv, it's no longer safe. So like these rules don't just apply to Twitter and Facebook, they apply to everything you do online. Other don'ts? Other don'ts. No one has other don'ts. Yes?
Don't say where you are at all times.
Okay, don't say where you are.
Develop like your habits and where you usually hang out.
Right, because no one likes to follow a narcissist, right? Like, it can't be just about me, right? What else? There was another one. Yes?
Do you mean like in regards to social networking in general, in regards to like activism and social
Internet media and social networking.
So like don't make a claim that can be like easily debunked.
Correct. Don't post lies, right? Like, don't post lies. And I'll talk about the do, but you want to build your credibility. And when it becomes known that you're no longer credible, no one's going to follow your feed, or at least you lose that credibility and people aren't going to turn to you. And that's one of the problems that we see with the right wing, is that some of the right wing is very legitimate and has built their credibility. Others in the right wing, like the Pamela Gellers, have been debunked as not credible, and that, that's a challenge for them. Granted, there are still people who like that. But remember that when we talk about these principles, we're talking about what works and what doesn't for building a viable social presence on the internet, but also like Islamic principles. So don't post lies, right? And I think that a lot of things coming back to the religion can be really important for us in guiding us in this process. Any other don'ts? Yes?
Hey, be careful if your account is personally tied to yourself, not to insult anyone or use profane language, because people will always find that.
Correct. And now imagine you curse someone out on a website, right? And I always tell people that when we do these things, never say anything that you wouldn't want to see on the front pages of the New York Times. And that's very much a reality. And I'll tell you that I'm dealing with something this week that's very much like that. I posted something that I shouldn't have, and it made it really far, right? And so now I've got to do the cleanup, and that's sort of the reality. So you curse someone out on the internet, it will get forwarded, and there's always that reality that one of your bosses will see it. That's very true. Yes?
Don't talk about things like that were illegal.
Don't talk about doing things illegal, absolutely. Now hopefully this doesn't apply to people in the room, but one of the advices that I've given to a friend's sister recently was, she was underage and she was posing with a picture of herself holding a bottle of a Corona bottle. And I said, you're 19, don't post that picture. What you do is what you do. Don't publicize it because you don't want it to be used against you. And we have seen in different court cases that what people post on the internet is used against them. And so in some of these alleged terror arrests, we've seen that their Facebook posts have been used against them, right? That their Facebook posts have become evidence. Particularly, I think with the individual that was accused of trying to blow up a military base or something in Baltimore a couple of months ago. Like, his Facebook page stayed up after he got arrested, and so people were going and exploring his Facebook page and making assessments about what his psyche was and what happened and what motivated him. And that affects the public perception of whether or not he was entrapped by the FBI or whether he was actually guilty of the crime he was accused of. Any other don'ts? Yes?
Don't post pictures that you want anybody else to see, because even if you take them down, somebody else could have saved them already.
Absolutely. So be very careful, right? So remember, once you post something on the internet, it is there permanently. So whether it's a picture of yourself that you maybe don't want someone else to see, or an email that you sent yelling at someone, or or a plot to do something illegal, anything of that sort. Once it's out there, and you can't take it down. Like, that's like what people do these days is they take screenshots, and I'll tell you that. Just recently, what we've seen is right-wingers taking screenshots of people's Twitter accounts, right? So they don't have to dig through it 10 months later to find out what they said that was inappropriate. They've got the pictures saved. And so, yeah, what you do is always out there, and people can always say that. Yes?
And this really needs to be stressed a lot, because, I mean, even if you do take it down, it is still catched onto the internet. Like, there is no way you can take it off once you put it on the internet, even if it is for a moment.
Right. And we've seen the government going after a lot of these accounts, going through Google, they recently subpoenaed Twitter for different information about people that were involved in WikiLeaks. And so, yeah, once it's there, it's there. Yes.
Yeah, and it's also worth mentioning, a lot of these companies in social media, part of their terms and conditions is that they own everything.
Right.
They're using a service, they have access to all your information, they can hold it forever.
Absolutely. Like, once you upload a picture on Facebook, it is theirs, right? And we saw that people had to change their privacy settings so the pictures weren't getting used in the advertisements. Any others? Okay. So the list I made was, remember, so again, keep in mind that this is social media etiquette, but it is also grounded in religion. So don't lie and don't betray trust, right? So someone sends you something personal, don't forward it, right? Like, people know when you do these things. Don't forward it. Don't lie and don't betray the trust. And that's like following within the model of the prophet. If someone trusts you with something, like that's a sacred trust note. And that's true for the internet as well. So if someone sends you something and says, please don't forward this, don't forward it. And you'll see that a lot of times when you're interacting with attorneys, they're going to put disclaimers on their emails saying that, this is intended solely for the original recipient. Similarly, don't lie. As we mentioned a while ago, if you put something out there that's not true, people will figure it out, right? And that immediately impacts your credibility. You don't want to be the liar. Don't say anything you wouldn't want plastered on the front page of the New York Times. I can't emphasize this enough. Whether it is a joke about your friends, whether it is a comment about the drugs you like to use, whether it is, a comment about going off to Afghanistan to fight somewhere. And I use these examples, and I really hope that they're not relevant in this room, but that's sort of a lot of what's being thrown at us these days. So if you don't want to see it on the front page of the New York Times, you don't use it. And a lot of times what it comes down to with activists is threats against each other, right? Is you get into a fight with someone on the internet, and we see this, right? The flame wars on the internet. Well, when you lose courtesy and adab in a flame war, know that it can be forwarded and it can be used against you, and we've actually seen that happen before. So be mindful of modesty. This goes to the question of pictures. Sheikh Suhaib a while ago posted a Facebook status that said he was on his friend's capacity. I think he reached 5,000, and that's about how much he can have. And this was before he created a fan page. And he said, the way I'm going to censor my Facebook page or my Facebook friends is, if you've got a picture that I shouldn't be looking at, maybe we shouldn't be friends, right? And so it really comes down to the idea that what you post on the internet, everyone sees and Allah sees. And so a lot of times it's easier to forget, right? And I just today, I'll tell you, I came across pictures of a girl that seemed like they were accidentally put up because she didn't have her hijab on, and she normally does wear hijab. So be very careful, and this particularly applies to women. Don't be me-centered. We talked about this. I don't want to know what you ate for dinner. I don't want to know what time you woke up. I don't want to know that you're in the restroom. You can do it, but know your audience, right? So if you're going for a social media activist feel, and all you're talking about is your hairstyle and what clothes you wear and where you went shopping and how you feel about certain things, people aren't interested in that. And we see that, so it's got to be balanced. And I'll tell you the balance I strike is that I do both. So there are times that I will share what I'm doing and what I'm wearing and where I'm going and what I'm eating. And there are other times when I won't, and it needs to really be balanced. So just know that know your audience, know that not everyone is interested in that. You guys not hear me in the back? Yeah. You can? You can. Okay. So What are the do's? We talked about the don'ts, those are negative and those aren't fun. What are the do's? What do you do to get big on the internet? Yes?
Follow people that have the same interests.
Correct. Follow people that have the same interests, but it's not just about following them, it's about building that relationship, right? So this is something that came up with a friend of mine who works, her entire job function is managing the Twitter accounts of 3 nonprofit organizations. Can you imagine doing that for a living? Like, how fun would that be, right? Like, and it is her job to tweet for these organizations, but also to develop their fan base and develop relationships. And so it's not just about who you follow, it's about getting them to follow you, it's about engaging them in conversations, right? So you want to make sure that people know who you are and they respect sort of what you're providing as output. For starters, I'd say start small. Like, that's really important. Start small. Know that you're not going to hit the internet and become an overnight sensation. Yes, there are unique cases like the GPS story, like random American Idol stories, where you can become a sensation overnight. But it doesn't happen often, right? You've got to start from the bottom and you've got to build. Do it frequently. Be consistent and do it all the time. So that doesn't mean that you need to like eat, sleep, and breathe on your smartphone. But it does mean that if you create an account and you don't use it except for once every 40 days, no one's going to be interested in what you're saying. But if you do it consistently, even if it's something small, so even if you're posting once every couple of days, people know that they can turn to you for something interesting, right? And I'll tell you that I go through my Twitter account and I delete people who aren't posting because they're taking up space, right? And I know that I'm not turning to them for information. The same goes for Facebook friends. I actually know people who do this with Facebook. They will delete people who they're not engaging in conversations with. And particularly with blogs, we'll see that with blogging, right, which is a really important platform. So if you can't get on to a mainstream news site to write an article because you don't have a master's in journalism or that's just not what you're doing for a career, consider a blog, right? That's one of the tools that's available to you. But write frequently, write every couple of days. A lot of times what we see is sort of internet burnout. Someone will start and they'll blog every day for a month, and then they'll stop. And you won't hear anything from them, right? So start small, and I know that like when we talk about like religious ritual, we talk about doing things small but regular. And that's important, that applies here as well, so that you don't burn out and then you build. And maybe it's not for you, but the way you find out is by following the steps, right? So another tip is write what you know or want to know. Don't write about things you don't know about. No one wants to hear someone who doesn't know what they're talking about speaking. And that's a lot of times what we see is, I get really upset about something, and so let me go vent about it. But in reality, I don't know anything about it. And so make sure that you do the research and you're actually talking. Now, if you want to build a social media presence, you want to do it consistently. So for example, if you're a civil rights attorney, you want to consistently blog about civil rights. If you've got a special interest in women's rights, you want to consistently blog about women's rights. And it's fine to throw in random things once in a while, but if you're all over the place, I don't know what I'm getting when I go to you, right? Like the reason you go to Al Jazeera is because you know it is consistent, reliable, fair media from the Middle East, and that's why you go there, right? The reason you don't go to Reddit, if you're not, someone that's into technology, correct me if I'm wrong, is that's a tech site, and that's where a lot of people who are interested in technology will go. So you know to not go there. So you want to be consistent in what you're doing and talk about what you know. Track your ability to influence. This is key no matter what you're doing. Honestly, this is key if you're fundraising for the MSA or holding an activity or writing a controversial piece. You want to know how far you're going and whether or not it's working. Because if Twitter is not working for you, maybe blogging will, right? Maybe something else will. But you want to measure your effectiveness and see where you're falling short and where you're gaining. Where are your visitors coming from? Are they commenting or are they not commenting? How long are they staying? Which of your pieces are the most popular? My husband does this to see which pieces are the most popular, right? So he'll write a couple of pieces a week and then he'll go back and see what worked and what didn't. And what we saw, interestingly, was the deep philosophical pieces that analyze the psyche. As important as those are to him, people weren't reading those as much as the short hit pieces on the right wing. Right? And so we saw what worked and what didn't. And he does both, but he knows what's going to be more effective. And so, build relationships. One of the things that I talked about with a friend that's a professional tweeter is, what does it mean to have followers on Twitter? So look yourself up on Twitter. How many followers do you have? Well, who are those followers? Is it just a bunch of dead accounts? Is it a bunch of spam? Are you walking around thinking you're all that because you have 5,000 followers, but 4,000 of them are porn and spam? That's a reality, right? And so know who your followers are and build relationships with them. Engage in them, right? Reply, answer their questions. And a lot of people say that you want to give more than you receive, and that's really the way you start off, is that people want someone who gives, who answers the questions, who participates, more than is just this is what I think, this is what I think, this is what I think. offer something unique, right? So if you're simply reposting the same piece over and over and over again, or if you're not saying anything different, know that it will take time for you to build a presence. But if you're offering a unique perspective, and I think a lot of times Muslims don't capitalize on this opportunity. The Muslim perspective right now is a very unique perspective. We get reporters and bloggers and tweeters who are asking, what are Muslims thinking? Even the right wing is asking, what are Muslims thinking? There simply just isn't enough of a Muslim voice out there. So the ability to provide your voice is key. So make sure that you're adding something to the conversation. Take criticism. I think this is really important for all of us, not just in social media and the power of the internet, but also as activists, right? Is learn to take criticism. And it's a really humbling process. When you do something wrong, take responsibility for it. When you post something that you shouldn't, take responsibility for it. When you insult somebody, even though you may not have intended to, take responsibility for it. And people will respect that. A lot of the internet media is built around respect and integrity. And so if there's someone, if you're someone that people know will engage in a respectful way, they're going to want to engage you. Otherwise, they're not, right? They don't care what you say if you're just, the person that everyone laughs at because you're always getting into a fight and because you can't take criticism. And lastly, and this is key because it is my last point, and I know I'm short on time, but when I'm short on time as in I'm coming in well short within my limit, is keep it short, right? Is people post these diatribes and people a key for Twitter, for example, is if you are always going over your character limit, you're doing it wrong. Get a blog, right? If you can't fit it in 140 characters, Twitter isn't for you. But also, if you can't fit it in 2,000 characters, a blog, or 2,000 words, a blog might not be for you. Maybe you want to pursue a PhD program and write a thesis. That really is something, is knowing your medium and knowing your specialization. And that's not to say that you shouldn't write a thesis, but I was talking to Zahra on my way up here about how we need to learn to specialize and we need to sort of understand what our strengths and our weaknesses are. There are things that some of us don't do well, and that's okay to admit, right? Why are you wasting your time on something that you're not succeeding at? And so those are the do's and the don'ts, and it really, like I said, it comes down to two things. Well, it's down to a few things. But the don'ts is, don't act unislamically, right? Don't lie, don't cheat, don't fight, don't do things you don't want people to see. And the do's are do it with respect, build credibility, build a reputation. And the idea is that you build a narrative so that you each bring an individual story so that when they Google Zahra Billoo or Huffington, they're telling their own story and it's not someone telling it for them. And that's coming back to the story that I opened with, is that the concern there that we saw with that Daniel Pipes protest, as well as with other situations where Muslims have been attacked, was you don't want them to tell your story. So when you Google, when I look up a Muslim, I don't want the first thing to be some right-winger story. I want it to be my story. I want it to be my voice. And you really have the ability to control that. And I urge all of you to use it. There's so many mediums out there, right? We talked about Facebook and Twitter and Reddit and, and even the Huffington Post. And all of these are mediums. Utilize them. And if you're not utilizing them, pick one. You don't create an account on all of them tomorrow, right? Create one account and focus on it and build it, right? And build that relationship and know that you have the impact to really, I think, change the hearts and minds of people around you. Okay. Questions? Yes.
Yeah, so you talked about social media, people getting their news about say the flotilla thing or the Tunisia situation from social media sites. But to what extent do you really think that activities on Facebook or Twitter will affect the larger over 35 audience in the world?
So it's funny, most of my bosses these days are over 35, right? And they're urging us to stay on Facebook because their coworkers are on Facebook. And so I think it really becomes about where do you want to influence and how do you want to impact things, right? So if we were to look at the purpose, the first purpose would be to simply inform, that it's important to know, right? How many people got their news about Tunisia from the New York Times or the Washington Post? Most of them got it from social media, and the idea was that the information age is the first step, right? So it comes down to the marketplace.
Even the general over 35 audience who...
I think that's growing, and I think that it will take time, but more and more people, yes, are turning to the internet. But again, I think that you've got to balance both, right? That's not to say, so none of what I've said today says don't go write a story for the print newspaper, right? I wasn't asked to talk about that, but I would urge you to know what your local newspaper is. And when you see something in there that you don't agree with, write a letter to the editor and correct them, right? And ask to be published. And if you do that regularly, they will start to respect your opinion. So what I said today about internet media being applied to print media, and I think it really becomes about leveraging both. but like understanding sort of this new medium and where it's coming from. Because the majority of people, I don't have the statistics on it, but they've got statistics these days that show that the majority of people are slowly moving towards a smartphone. So in a couple of years, more people will have smartphones than have regular phones. And what that means is that more people will be using the internet for their information. But again, don't neglect one or the other.
I had like a quick anecdote about like the power of the internet when you mentioned earlier. So about like the commuter situation, my whole family is there, and as you know, like a lot of it happened through Facebook, right? So I decided to call my cousin who lives in the capital through Skype. And I'm talking to her, and this is like after the president has fled the country, and she's telling me, she's like, dude, like there are all these like looters that have been like, they're criminals out of prisons, and they're like trying to take our stuff, and you know, my uncle is downstairs trying to guard the apartment, blah blah blah. And all of a sudden she hears like my uncle's wife saying something like, oh, there's a number that you should call. And I hear it, I'm like, no, I got the number to call the army in case somebody like robs your house or something. And I had the number through Facebook before she did in Tunisia. And so I was like, okay, so here's the number. And I gave her like the number in like the capital and like different cities, you know. And then I found that like really crazy, you know, like I have the same information you're getting and I even got it before you did.
Right. Absolutely. No, and that's like a perfectly good example of how important that information is. So often we see, for example, when there's a protest and people need legal help, you'll see the numbers on Facebook before you'll actually get them in print, right? And that's really key. And we also saw, for example, with the second round of the flotilla, a lot of the second flotilla that came through, they cut the power on the internet so that people couldn't tweet. And so you saw a diminished amount of tweeting the second time around because they saw the first time how much power it had when people were able to get the information independently. Yes?
I'm sorry, but at the point where mostly when they have Facebook, you're very open to different kind of people. So once you enter Facebook, I would think that other people could actually understand your mentality more. And I don't think that we should put our like mentality out so much in like what we're thinking and like all these different stuff, because so other people can see it also, but also our enemies could get an impact on that and know our mentalities and know our weaknesses, and that's how they could get closer to us. So if we got a place to do all these stuff, then it's really easy for them to just to pinpoint us and find our weaknesses.
So one of the things that I opened with was actually the marketplace of ideas, right? And I come from the perspective that I don't think that we should self-censor, that we shouldn't be hiding our mentality or our beliefs, that we should put that out there, and really, you know, light shines through in darkness. And so if we were to compare the ideas of like our ideas, whether it's on Palestine or politics or finances or really anything, next to someone that you disagree with, the idea is if I truly believe that my idea is better, it will win out in the marketplace of ideas. And at the same time, if it's not a better idea, right? So this may not apply to a question of Palestine, but it may apply to a question of finances or a question of MSA politics. There's one of the scholars said that when I argue with someone, I hope that the truth will come from them so that I am humbled, right? And I think it's important for us to be open to dialogue and debate. And so it is a question of how much of yourself do you want to put out there, but I think exploring the privacy settings can quite often fix that problem. So, you know, who are you friends with? Who is on your page, and how much of yourself are you putting out there? Yes, don't put your personal information out there. So if you got into a fight with your parents about how you're going to finance your graduate school program, and they said this is haram, this is haram, this is haram, and only the kafirs go to journalism school, right? Which, you know, hopefully parents don't say, but is a reality in some households. That's not something you're going to put on the internet. But if it's a question of, you know, these are the different Islamic financing options that I'm exploring, then that's valuable to put on the internet. And so I think that we all have to gauge that individually and see where our comfort levels are. But I really am an advocate of not censoring ourselves. And you know, that has to be balanced with not forgetting tact. So you want to have tact, and you want to make sure that what you're saying reflects positively on yourself and on the community, because by default we're all ambassadors. But I don't think that you should shy away from it.
So I got to blog for a while, and I think one of the hardships I found was that because it was the only public forum that I was using, it felt like I was writing a letter to the world every single time. And it was like you said, it was as if I felt like, okay, once I put it out there, it's out there. So one of the things I'm sort of struggling with, I feel like, you know yourself, you're an activist, you maybe have like these like, you know, like feminist, this, that, like you can enumerate what things you think characterize your, you know, your beliefs. What if you're not entirely sure where you're fitting in, if you're going to be, how vocal you're going to be, how active, whatever. How do you develop that persona, and how do you make sure that you're really addressing your target audience?
I think it comes with time. So it is a learning curve, right? And sort of following the do's and don'ts, ensure that you don't trip up and embarrass yourself while you're growing. So regardless of how you feel about a certain issue or whether or not it's going to be the issue that, for example, you're going to focus on for the rest of your career, be cautious in how you post about it. Don't post lies. Don't post sources that are not credible. And so really follow sort of the etiquette of the internet to ensure that wherever you go and however that growth process happens for you, you're not, embarrassed by something 5 years later. And, I think be open to criticism and open to the fact that we're all learning and growing. And so yes, I've been doing this for a few years, but I'll tell you, I just embarrassed myself this week. So, and I think I embarrassed myself 2 weeks ago too. So it happens, and I think that we learn. We learn from our errors and we learn with age.
I want just to talk about something in social media happening today in marketing. There's a lot of companies that are like letting down advertising or banner advertising because they are doing like only social media marketing. And I want to give an example of a company called Gatorade. It's a competitor of vitamin water, and they have a mission.
Actually, which is embarrassing for me, so I apologize.
Yeah. So Gatorade, they have an entire room where people work only to like listen to the internet, and because there is websites where you can listen to what people say on Facebook and Twitter, and then if somebody like say something that they are interested in something like juice or drink or something, they start like sending messages and commenting on what they say and so on, so they can engage with people and get them to buy their products. And that's how they reached 2.5 million followers on the Facebook page, and they are listening to the web and doing the marketing.
No, absolutely. And I'll tell you an example of that I actually really appreciate more personally is that Baskin-Robbins and I have a great Twitter relationship, right? So like they'll post something on Twitter and I'll repost it, or I'll send it to my husband who doesn't like ice cream so much, and they know that I do that. Coffee Bean is the same thing, and Coffee Bean is a company that I'm a big fan of, particularly because in Northern California we're deprived of Coffee Bean. Instead we have Starbucks overwhelmingly all over the place, which is unfortunate. And Coffee Bean, if you post something about them, they will respond to you, right? And they'll thank you for
listening.
Exactly, they're listening. But I think that, translate that to activism, right? And we see that the right wing is doing that. I will tell you that most Muslim organizations these days have internet stalkers that are dedicated to them, right? Most activists have internet stalkers that are dedicated to them. And you'll see that there are websites that simply like follow and retweet. Like I'll tell you, I tweet for one of our care offices.
Sorry?
I tweet for one of our care offices, right? So I tweet for myself personally and I tweet for one of the care offices. And within 2 days of creating that account, we had right-wingers retweeting everything we were saying and sharing it with their followers and getting spam from people who didn't like Muslims. And so there are people who sit on Twitter, but also people who sit on the internet, and literally that is their job. And you see that they make careers out of this. So while my friend does it in a positive way for several nonprofit organizations that do community service for sort of the larger community, there are also people that do it negatively, and I think that we have to be cognizant of that. And that goes back to, again, whatever you say comes out there. And so yes, know that what you say about Gatorade will be used to sell you more Gatorade, and what you say about ice cream will be used to sell you more ice cream. I'll tell you that I posted about ice cream today, and it was, I forget what it was, but it was an ice cream thing. And immediately I started to get ice cream ads, right? And so be cognizant of that, but also know, and the same applies to Palestine, or civil rights, or the MSA, or UCLA. People are paying attention. Other questions? Comments? Yes.
After or if you post something that, let's say, you regret later, how do you deal with the clean damage control?
I would say that the worst thing to do is to take it down without explaining it, right? So a couple of years ago, I posted something that made me sound suicidal. I know this is really weird. I wasn't suicidal, but I remember it was a poster. It was a pro-Israel poster on a train station in the Bay Area, and I posted a comment about it that was misinterpreted as me feeling suicidal about it. And immediately, or actually it wasn't immediate, but like years later, as I grew into my activism, people started to sort of dig up what has Zahra Billoo been saying. And that was one of the tweets that they found is, well, she's driven to suicide at the question of Israel. And yes, Israel is really upsetting, but it doesn't drive you to suicide. And so I remember I learned from that experience that simply taking it down wouldn't suffice, because then it would be, well, we scared her into taking it down. And instead it's got to be, I've revisited my words, or this is open to misinterpretation. And so I think and this goes to the question of taking criticism and really humbling ourselves, is whatever it is a lot of times, and it depends. Like if it's something that you decide to take down personally, then maybe that's okay. But if it's something that, that you're questioned about, then you take ownership of that and say that I've learned from this experience. Other questions or concerns? Okay, this was weird. I feel like a teacher in the class dismissed, but I'll let her say that.
I don't have like a very articulate question to ask, but I was hoping that you could talk about, I guess like the juncture between the persona you develop on the internet versus the person you feel like you are in the world, right? And sort of, I guess like along with that, yeah, just that.
So, when I was looking for work after law school, I was very cognizant of the fact that my employers would Google me. And when I was courting to get married, I needed the potentials to be very cognizant of the fact that I would Google them, right? And that's sort of the reality is we Google each other these days, right? But that's what we do, that's how we research. And so I think it's, the choice I've made is that the persona that I have on the internet should be as reflective of me in reality as I can possibly be, right? Is that it's not, for me, it's not about creating a fake persona. It's really about making sure that it reflects reality, but also that I control that discourse and that I control my identity on the internet. And that's sometimes why it's really important to engage in this type of activity because, going back to what I was saying is that you don't want someone else telling your story. And so when I Google you, I want to see your resume, and I want to see what you've done, and I want to see how you feel about certain things. And embrace that, right? And it's really important to do. I'll tell you another, that's sort of the route I've taken. The route a friend of mine took recently was he created a sort of a pseudo-identity. And the idea was he didn't want to be tied to certain things that he was doing. He wanted to separate his activism and his professional life. And so he didn't need his employer to see what he was doing with certain organizations. And he didn't want prospective employers to see what he was doing. And he made that cognitive decision. He actually changed the way he was framing the message and changed the spelling of his name. Now some of us have an easier time doing that because we have unique names, right? And others don't. Like I will tell you, Ahmed Abdullah Muhammad might have a harder time doing that because there's probably a lot of him out there. But even then, it's important to control that identity. And so, however you choose to do it, whatever approach you take, make sure to take control of it.
Sorry, I remember the second part of what I was going to ask, which is, to what extent do you feel like when you are posting about yourself, or even if people ask about you, that you're, in whatever form, representing the Muslim population, and how do you deal with that challenge?
Sure. So I've got a heightened sense of that because I work for a Muslim community organization, right? And so my challenge is that not only do I represent myself and all Muslim women and the Muslim community and Bay Area Muslims and Pakistani Muslims and feminist Muslims, I also represent care quite often. And so what I mean is that you have to be cognizant of that, right? And you have to be cautious of your words. And I think that also, at the same time, it's important for us as a community to sort of reframe the discussion, to sort of put out there that it's not about, that all Muslims aren't just saying that we aren't a monolithic community, that we're a very diverse community, right? And we see the diversity in our views, in our politics, in the way we dress, in our ethnic backgrounds, and in the food we eat, right? And it's important for us to sort of create that as well, and make sure part of this is framing the discussion, right? And so you want to frame that discussion. So be cognizant of the fact that yes, there are people that will hold against everyone in your community what you do as an individual. And at the same time, it is also your opportunity to show that you might be different from other people. And I think an interesting, very recent example that a lot of people face with that one in the Muslim community, particularly young people, was the question of prophet and gay marriage. There was a lot of disagreement amongst young Muslims about how they felt about that, right, and how they approached that. And I think a lot of people had to be very cognizant of whatever they posted on the internet, whether it was gay bashing or pro-gay marriage or something neutral, right, and an assessment of it would reflect on the entire community. But I think it was also a really interesting opportunity for us as young Muslims to sort of frame the discussion as we don't have one answer as a community, that there is a diversity of opinion. Yes?
A lot of times every person has different interests. Like you might have certain academic interests in your life, certain interests that are related to professional careers, certain activist interests or hobbies, entertainment that you're interested in. And you want to be involved on a social media platform, each one of these, but each one has a certain niche. So sometimes I personally have probably come along with this problem. I know other people have. If you try and create separate accounts or create separate identities for each one, you're going to end up burning out. Some of them are going to fall out, and you still are equally dedicated to each one. So have you ever come across this problem where
I haven't personally. I'll tell you, I have a friend that had two Facebook accounts, and she had one for work and one for her personal life. And she recently deleted the one for work, and she said, I'm going to merge these identities, such that people, and she was in a situation like myself where she worked for a civil rights organization, and so it was okay for her to sort of merge those identities. But I also know people who, for example, like the catering manager at the hotel that we have our banquet at, right, is great. She's very personable. She has a Facebook account. She doesn't add her clients on her Facebook account, right? So she communicates with her clients in a certain way, right? And she limits one medium to them, and she doesn't mix the medium. And the idea really is that her personal life is her personal life, and then her professional life is her professional life. And so that's, I think, probably an important thing to consider. And that's also a smart tip for just anyone who's using social media sites and in the workplace is consider again your privacy settings, as I mentioned earlier. Your boss may not need to know what you did on a Saturday night, and that's sort of the reality.
Establish limits.
Right.
So my issue is I think with lots of Muslim bloggers or people on Tumblr and whatnot, I feel like lots of these people, they tend to make these posts about either about Islam or the Middle East or whatnot. I feel like lots of their posts tend to restrict these kind of topics about Islam or the Middle East or something. I feel that like we would have more popular Muslims on the internet if they tried catering towards other audiences in the sense that I feel like if you have more Muslims who blog about a variety of things, film, music, politics, food and whatnot, then you'd have more popular Muslims on the internet. You'd be like, oh, that guy, Muhammad is a film critic, but he's also Muslim. And that kind, I mean, like all these, I go to a bunch of music and film websites, and all these popular music and film critics I know, they're Muslim. Or at least they don't say that they're Muslim.
And I think that's why it's really important for us to sort of get involved in that sector, right? It comes down to specializations. That someone who specializes in the Middle East is just not going to be a good film critic blogger, right? But someone who's interested in films shouldn't feel like they're obligated to blog about the Middle East simply because they're Muslim. It's important for us to create those identities. And I think that's true for internet activism. It's also true for sort of the career paths that we choose, right? Is that we don't all need to be working at the mosque, and we don't all need to be working for Muslim organizations. And those are very noble careers for us to have. But at the same time, like I'll tell you, a friend of mine works in landlord-tenant law. And the dawah that she does, right, representing people who've been mistreated by their landlords as a Muslim female lawyer, is a lot of times far more expansive than something I could do speaking to a church or a synagogue. And I think that's important for us to consider sort of all around. And this goes more to something that young professionals deal with, is how do I manage my Muslim identity and my professional identity? Do I wear my Islam on my sleeve, or do I not talk about religion in the workplace? And I have friends that do both. So for example, some people are very practicing but don't ever talk about religion in the workplace, and their coworkers simply wouldn't know that they were Muslim. And others do, right? They fast and they bring sweets in Ramadan to the workplace, and they sort of talk about it. And so that becomes a personal choice. And my suggestion or my advice is that whatever you do, whether it is in social media or whether it's in your professional career later on in life, to embrace sort of your Muslim identity and to make sure that wherever you go, whether you're a teacher or a principal or a film critic, that people know who you are. Yes?
Is that your Muslim identity, isn't it different than your own personal identity? Like, it's good to bring out Islam and say this is Islam. But I disagree of putting out your personal self out there, because there could be some people where I don't think it's necessary, or it wouldn't be right that these thoughts go to everybody. But of course, when we're putting out our Muslim ideas, is with everybody. Everybody has Muslim, they have their own Muslim perspectives, and it's good to put it on different Facebook or stuff, because other people could see it and they can learn from this stuff. But when it's your personal life and your personal stuff, I don't think that would be good if you could put it.
So I think again, that goes back to your first question. That really is a personal choice, and I would recommend that if you are an American Muslim who works in a career that isn't a Muslim career, it is still okay to share that, and that is a part of your identity as an American Muslim. But how we structure our identity is individual and sort of a larger question. But yeah, I will tell you that myself as an individual, when I share my thoughts, I do that as a young American Muslim woman. And so what I say is impacted by my faith and is shaped by my faith, and is a reflection of how I practice my religion, whether it comes to questions of civil rights as they apply to other communities, or how I feel about Middle East politics.
respond maybe to that. Like, I think also, when you talk a little bit about the personal, like when you, not necessarily entirely expose the personal, but mention it, I think it's very humanizing. It humanizing to our community. And I think that sort of plays with, like, it goes with what you were saying about sort of expanding out in terms of like, reaching out, or, you know, virtually.
Right, and then it's really important for us to make sure that our sphere of influence isn't just Muslim, because then we're simply preaching to the choir. That it's good to have, you know, sort of access to those different communities. Yes.
Well, yeah, and also, and if you're like a Muslim who has like a really unique perspective on things, like you work in a certain field that not a lot of Muslims have a ton of interest in, you can really play a vital role in terms of educating our community. Like, for example, I can't really think of like a blogger on climate change in the Islamic world off the top of my head, or like a Muslim who works on refugee health in the United States. I mean, I'm from San Diego, there's a huge refugee community who's Muslim, so, and I mean, stuff like that, if you work in a region like that, you can educate a lot of people, because I mean, we're all young Muslims, but we're all highly connected on the internet and stuff, and we would probably hear it.
And just so you know, because I think it's important for us to talk about climate change as a community, look up Ibrahim Saleh and green dean, right? And that's an individual who, for example, is not in what most of us would consider a traditional Muslim career, and rather he's made a personality of himself and a career for himself out of sort of teaching the Muslim community how to green our lives. So he recently came out with Green Dean, and it's a book and it's done really well and funded at most Borders bookstores, and it's not a traditional path. But again, he's been on Fox News and he represents. So when they hear that name, when they hear Ibrahim Saleh, and they know that he's talking about greening the Muslim community, they see that perspective and they learn from that you know, Islam is more than just prayer in Palestine. Not to say that those two things aren't important, but that it is really important. Any other questions?
Okay, we're actually at the end of the session, Alhamdulillah. Next is Isha and dinner, so we have praying Isha in the Court of Science.